city today, but there's a sort of a small spot where nothing is built to the northwest side of the city. And if you type in Google Tel Es, so Tellses, Sultan, Tel Es Sultan, that is the name of the archaeological site of ancient Jericho. You can look at it for yourself. And there's actually pretty nice pictures that you can see of Tel Es Sultan. It's sort of right next to a mundane parking lot and right around the corner from a hotel. So it's just like a place in a city that you can go visit today if you, well, not today, it'd take you a little while to get tickets and stuff, but you could go visit it. This is a real, actual place. Numerous excavation teams have affirmed it, and its location is undisputed. Let's flip back very briefly to Joshua chapter 2, starting the second half of verse 1. So they went and came up to the house of a harlot named Rahab. So this is the Israelite spies who were coming in. And they lodged there, verse 15, jumping down a little bit. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall. She dwelt on the wall. This is interesting. Do we have any evidence of that? So in a walled city, so if you were to build a wall around something, every block of stone, every mud brick that you carry is heavy and it costs money. So you want to make the walls as big as you need to fit all the stuff inside that you need to fit, but not really much bigger. So space in a city, just like today, like New York City, space is at a premium. This was no different back in ancient times. Building materials were expensive. You don't want to fill up space with unnecessary extra walls. You don't want to spend money on extra building materials that you didn't need. Okay? So using the existing city walls meant saving space and saving money. So this is actually something that was very common for cities at the time. Buildings sharing walls and even using the existing outer city wall as part of their own construction. And in excavations, we find houses of mud brick that use the city wall as a house wall, and that is typical of houses in this period. More on that later. Let's flip back over to chapter 6 and verse 3. Here are the instructions the Lord gives. You shall march around the city, all you men of war. You shall go around the city once. This you shall do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. But the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. Something I've wondered ever since I was young, just how big were cities back then? Like if you had to march around New York City, you might be able to do that in a day. Could you do it 7 times in a day? I don't know. But what do we find in Jericho? We actually, I say we like I've been out there, other people who have dug in the dirt, they have gone out to Tel Es Sultan and they have measured. They found the city, they found the walls, it's all there, and they've measured it. The walls encompassed roughly 17 acres. So if you're an American, that's roughly like 15 football fields. So could you walk around something the size of 15 football fields in a day? Yeah, it'd take you, a few minutes, 20 minutes maybe if you're going slow. It wouldn't take you that long. Marching around it, but you couldn't just march around, like if this was the city, it was sort of like an oval shape if you look at the maps. You can't just like march right around the outside, because what do they have in the city? They can drop rocks on your head, or they can shoot you with bows and arrows or slings. So you have to take the size of the city, and you have to increase the range by however far they could shoot bows and arrows, because you don't want to get shot with bows and arrows, right? Go. So you have to. You can take that radius. It's fairly easy, back of the napkin math. But going around this 7 times would be something like 8 miles. Can someone, could I walk 8 miles in a day? I could. I'd be sore the next day. But could a soldier do this? Yeah. It would take 2 to 4 hours. If you've ever been hiking for 2 to 4 hours, that's about how long it would take. Okay. That's about how long it would take. Easy. Maybe not easy, but it's doable at least. It's certainly something that's doable. Let's jump down to verse 5. It shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with a ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, that all the people shall shout with a great shout, then the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, every man straight before him. And some more interesting details. Go up, every man straight before him. If you know anything about Jericho, it was not, unlike a lot of cities, built on the top of a mountain or a hill. Jericho is actually the lowest elevation of any city in the ancient world, 854 feet below sea level. How are you going to go up to Jericho if it's 854 feet below sea level? And if the walls fell down, why would they need to go up? Like if the walls didn't fall down, yeah, you have to go up, right? But if all the walls fell down flat, why would you need to go up? So a couple of interesting questions. We know from archaeology now that the walls were built in an interesting, unique way. They're called cyclopean walls. You think of the Cyclops because the stones that they used in these walls were so big that people thought that only a Cyclops could pick them up. It's actually where the name comes from. Think of it like this podium here. So if this was the flat ground, Jericho itself is sort of built up on a dirt mound. Okay, but if you put the walls right here, and this is dirt, this is actually, we're building the walls of Jericho, everybody. So if you put the walls right here, if you put, and these are heavy, right? If you do that, what's going to happen? Yeah, it's going to fall. So the dirt and stuff is going to sort of slough off and slough away. So what they would do is they would put big, heavy rocks to build a retaining wall. Let me move that before it falls. To build a retaining wall all around this city mound. Okay, so that is at the ground level. Those walls cannot fall down. And how high were they? If you look from here to the top of that, the white where the projector screen comes out, about 12 feet tall. So from the ground level up to just the top of this stone retaining wall was 12 feet. It might be a little bit more than 12 feet, but roughly that high. And then on top of these retaining walls, there were built walls of mud brick. Cheaper to do, easier to lift. It was built of mud brick, and that was another 20 feet tall. So imagine if you lay on the ground and then look all the way to the top of this vaulted ceiling, it'd be about that tall. Interesting. Okay, so if the walls... So if you were here marching as an Israelite, and then the ground floor of Jericho is right here, and then there's walls on top of that, how are you going to get up? Well, it makes sense that, yes, you would have to go up, but when the walls fell, what we find in archaeology is that the walls fell outward, exactly like you see here, creating a perfect ramp that the men could go up into the city, each one in front of him. That's how they could go up. That's how they could go up. We know from excavations that the city suffered, quote, a catastrophic destruction. This is what archaeologists say. The walls were destroyed, but not in the typical manner. So something actually strange happened at Jericho. You know the story already because you've read the Bible. So typically, if you had walls like this, if you were like the Roman army, you can't just count on God to knock the walls down for you. So what they would normally do, they might dig. So the Roman army might be way out here, and they would dig a tunnel under the walls, and you can imagine this would be very expensive and very difficult. People would die doing this. They would dig a tunnel under the walls and undermine the walls. And then they might they would shore it up with wood and stuff, and they could set that on fire. And then once the beams and things burn down, the ground that the walls are sitting on collapses, and then a small area of the wall here also collapses. So that is one way to overcome walls. Another way, I believe the Babylonians loved to do this, and other nations did as well. You could take dirt from all around and just put a bunch of dirt here and make a long earthen bulwark, a long earthen ramp, and the soldiers can just walk right up into the city. So that's another way that ancients could overcome walls like this. Another way, so some of these cities would have like a ditch, a moat. So if there was a moat, you would fill the moat in with dirt and debris and stuff. But if the walls were still there, you could come up with a battering ram and you would basically hit the walls until they fell in. At Jericho, we find none of these things. We don't find that the walls were collapsed in just one particular area. We don't find that the walls were collapsed inward. We don't find giant earthen ramps that allowed soldiers to go over. I'm going to read the quote from this archaeologist. The mud brick city wall, all the brick was found collapsed except for one section of the wall. It fell down everywhere and outward, by the way. So not inward, it fell down outward, except for this one spot. The wall was annihilated all around the city. Not inward, outward. Not in just one section, all of it, forming a ramp up into the city all around, but again, except in one section. Why would all of the wall fall down except in one section? That's interesting. Maybe you're thinking of Rahab. Maybe that's not a bad conclusion. If we back up to Joshua chapter 2, let's back up to Joshua chapter 2. Rahab says that the inhabitants of Jericho had heard about the defeat of the Amorites, and they were quite scared. She says, our hearts melted, like all their courage dried up. So yet by chapter 6, the king of Jericho insists on fighting anyway. So Rahab knew that if she gave up and sort of converted, that she would be spared, right? So that this was not an uncommon thing. If the citizens, residents of Jericho, all wanted to convert to Judaism, do you think God would have spared them? Yeah, absolutely. God allowed for that and accounted for that and wanted that. But these people, most of them at least, did not want to. Why, despite their hearts being melted, their courage being all dried up, after hearing about all the things that the Israelites did, why did they still insist on fighting? Well, very likely because the Israelites delayed so long that by the time they arrived in Jericho, the time of year was well in the city's favor. The time of year was well in the city's favor. They had plenty of food, and not only that, inside the walls of the city, we find an ancient spring. They had basically unlimited food and unlimited water by the time the Israelites arrived. They could easily outlast any siege. This is weird. Why would the Israelites, led by the commander of hosts, why would the Israelites delay so long after letting the people of Jericho know that they were there? 2 Samuel chapter 11, the first verse or so, it says that it happened in the spring of the year at the time when kings go out to battle. The spring of the year, so springtime, is when kings go out to battle. Why does the Bible say that in the spring of the year kings go out to battle? Fall is lovely, right? Winter, it's not so cold. Summer, you got sunshine. Why spring? Why spring? Why is it that when kings go out to battle is the springtime? They wouldn't just go marching any old time. When in the year they fought battles often made the difference between victory and defeat. Even in modern times, if you look at like World War II between Germany and the USSR, Operation Barbarossa, what happened initially? Initially, Hitler's forces had great success invading Russia, but then what happens? Then comes the fall, the mud. So it snows because you're in Russia. It snows, and then it's not that cold yet, so the snow melts, and then everything is muddy, and everything is getting stuck in the mud. Same thing happened to the Roman armies. Same thing happened to ancient armies throughout all history. So they know, okay, we don't want to go in the fall. We don't want to go when it's the most wet. And then in the winter, well, what happened to Hitler's armies? It's cold in Russia, turns out, right? So you have to pick the appropriate time of year if you want to ensure the greatest success. Okay, once that happened, then things were not looking good for them. So you have to avoid the rainy season in the fall, and in the winter you risk getting stuck in the mud. But also, if you wait too long, there is a little something called the spring harvest. So inside the city, there wouldn't be farms and things. There might be like very small gardens, but there wouldn't really be farms in the city. It was very urban. But outside the city walls, there would be acres and acres and acres of land, and mostly, or much of it would be farmland. So if you were smart, because there wasn't like a Kroger or whatever, a Publix to go, if you were marching your armies around, you couldn't just like pop into Walmart and pick up some chickens, right? Some rotisserie chickens. You would have to eat off the land. So if you're smart, you take your army, smart king, so put on your smart king hat. You have to go marching when the food is still in the fields, but you can't march, you can't eat when the plants are this big, right? So you have to go when the food is ripe enough to where you can eat, but not so ripe that the cities have all harvested the food and brought it in behind the walls. There's a time when kings go to war, and it is just as the food is ripening in the springtime, but before the harvest time in the spring, in the late spring. So that is why there is a particular time when kings go to war. So what do we find in the book of Joshua? What time of year did Joshua come to Jericho? Well, we know when. Joshua chapter 3, verse 15, notes that the Israelites crossed the Jordan River when it was at its flood stage. And it's weird how the Bible just sort of includes these little details that I wonder why it says that. Well, it's really important if you're an archaeologist, if you're trying to piece together a lot of these things. It says that it was overflowing its banks, which occurs around March to April due to the melting snow from Mount Hermon and the seasonal rains. And importantly, it specifically says in chapter 3 that this was already the time of harvest. But the Israelites did not attack yet. It's almost as if, so if you remember back to Gideon and some of these other military operations in the Old Testament, God doesn't really recommend for them to use the most tactical timing and the biggest armies and all this. He says, no, you have too many people. We're not going to do it this way because you guys might get confused and think that you did this because of your own power. So a lot of times God would specifically maneuver his armies and his people to put them in this very disadvantageous position. And I believe that's exactly what happened here. So the people of Jericho, they know there's this army coming to them. But they have weeks to prepare. Chapter 5, verses 10 through 12, the Israelites, what do? They take time to celebrate the Passover, which would take about a week. They take time to celebrate the Passover after crossing over the Jordan, and then it specifically says they eat the produce from the land which was already ripe. But not only that, right after Passover, so they don't just cross the river and then, attack after Passover. No, it also says that thousands of men, these soldiers, were circumcised because while they were wandering around in the wilderness, they didn't, apparently. They were not circumcised, apparently. So God says, oh, hey, now, right before we go attack the city, let's just take another week or so to circumcise all these men, and then we're going to give them time also. We're going to give them time to recover because, the older you are, it's harder to recover from some of these things. So according to the clues we find in the Bible, we see that Joshua attacks Jericho at possibly the worst imaginable time. But on the rare occasion you did attack a city during a suboptimal time, you'd at least have the reward of, hey, all right, they collected all the food, we're going to starve out here if we don't defeat this city really quickly. And a lot of times they would, and the sieges would break because they had more food inside the city than the armies had outside the city. But at least if you could conquer a city quickly enough, then you would have the reward of, hey, there's all this food in the city, now we can eat, we can take all the food. But again, we don't find that with the situation in Jericho. What do we find in the archaeological record? In ancient times, to preserve their grain, they would dig like trenches or ditches and put large things of pottery like halfway submerged into the dirt, sort of like if you have a cellar or basement. We don't have too many of those today. In Florida, other places they have cellars, and it's always sort of like a constant temperature if you're under the ground. So they would do that kind of thing. They would keep their grain, their olive oil, and basically it would keep good. It would keep good for a very, very long time. What we find in excavations is that the jars that they would store their food in are still there. They're not taken. Archaeologists, there's pictures, and if you would like to see some of the pictures, come find me after. I'll show you some of the pictures, the photographs of these items that we have found. So we see that the jars are not taken, but neither are they empty, as if there was like a protracted siege. If the siege lasts, in history we know that some of these sieges could last for weeks or months or years. That would not be uncommon. If a siege lasted for years, well, the grain in the jars would be eaten, and it would be lower and lower and lower and empty. Well, if they're empty, obviously they wouldn't take the jars of food, right? But what we find is jar after jar after jar full of food, as if this siege happened very, very quickly. But if they were full of food, why wouldn't Joshua and his army take them? It doesn't make sense. So another interesting thing about ancient armies is frequently, so if you join the army today, they pay you. Whether you go to war or not, you're paid. In ancient times, frequently, there was no salary. You wouldn't get paid. How would you get paid? Well, if you conquer the city, whatever you find, you take. That's the long and the short of it. So Roman armies, they frequently wanted to go to war because, Papa needs a new pair of shoes, right? So that is why many of these armies were so eager to go to war all the time, because, hey, we want to take your stuff. But what do we find in the book of Joshua? God commands them, don't touch anything. Don't take anything. Apart from certain metals that was going to be used for the Lord's treasury, God says, don't take it. Don't touch it. It's not yours. He says, burn it. The whole city is to be burned, dedicated to the Lord. Completely, absolutely, entirely backwards. Nothing is what you would expect unless it is, as God says in the Bible, that's what he said he wanted to have happen, and that's what happened. And part of this is why we find just a little bit later in chapter 7, with the defeat of Ai, the sin of Achan. So imagine you're Achan, you're a soldier in the army, and you conquer Jericho, and then you get paid nothing. And then you come and conquer this other city, and God says, again, you get paid nothing. Do you think that would build up a little bit of resentment in you? There's a reason why Achan does what he does. In addition to the walls being destroyed, the city was destroyed by an extensive fire that left behind a thick layer of ash that still shows up in the archaeological digs. Amongst debris and collapsed buildings, these jars full of food are burned rather than being looted and taken by the attackers. Besieging a city and then to not loot it is unthinkable. If it were not for God telling Joshua, chapter 6, verse 18 and on, 17 and on, unless God told Joshua and the Israelites to do exactly that, that would not have happened. Time after time, detail after detail, we find the historical proof lining up pretty much exactly with what the Bible says. But there is one question. When did all of this happen? A couple of passages help us date the Exodus biblically. 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, it says that it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the second month, then he began to build the house of the Lord. And it's commonly held that, basically just without dispute, that Solomon began his reign around 970 BC. Around 970 BC. So if we subtract the 4 years from his reign, if we subtract the 40 years or so wandering the desert in the wilderness, we come to a time of the Israelites in besieging Jericho about 1400 BC. 1400 BC is the approximate date, give or take. Also in Judges chapter 11, right around verse 26, we have Jephthah saying something interesting. Jephthah, who lived around 1100 BC, he says that the Israelites have been in that land for 300 years. Again, which pegs the Exodus, or the time that we're talking about here in Joshua, at around 1400 BC. Okay, so that's the time that the Bible claims. But one of the most famous archaeologists to ever excavate Jericho was a woman named Kathleen Kenyon, and she claimed that no, actually none of these dates don't add up, because Jericho in the 1400s BC was already destroyed and sacked. So maybe the Israelites came and saw this destroyed city, and then they made up this story. Oh, maybe that's what happened. So if the times don't line up, then maybe that's it. So therefore, she said the walled city of Jericho fell around 1550 BC, so 150 years beforehand. So she claims that the events of the book of Joshua were not historical. But she came to this date because a certain kind of pottery that was expected to be there around the 1400s BC, it's called chocolate on white, and it actually looks like chocolate on white pottery, and another kind of pottery called Cypriot bichrome, where she says, well, we would expect that kind of pottery to be there in the 1400s BC, but not this other time. So sort of like if you and I were to go archaeologically digging, excavating, and we find like cans of hairspray and jackets with shoulder pads and acid wash jeans, like could we fairly confidently date those items? Probably the 80s, right? So archaeologists, they largely do the same thing. They say, oh, this style. So today we can say this style of clothing, we can date it to here because of what we know about the surrounding culture. They take this pottery and they say, oh, we date this pottery to roughly here because we know that this was the pottery that was in fashion at the time. Okay, so archaeologists do the same thing. So they say if this really fell in the 1400s BC, then we should expect to find these, and we don't find that kind of pottery. Until she died. After she died, her excavation reports were posthumously published, revealing the exact pottery she claimed wasn't there was there. Not only that, but Egyptian scarabs, like small little carved pieces of soapstone or pottery, ivory or ceramic, that kind of thing. One side of it looked like a scarab, and the other side was marked with the name of the pharaoh. This was like, because today we have the news, so-and-so is president, so everybody knows, right? But back then, if you have a kingdom in Egypt and you want other people to know, you would make these little scarabs and you'd hand them out. So-and-so's in power now. And that's sort of what they would do for their administration. Scarabs have been found in the Jericho ruins for Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and Amenhotep III as well, but none of the subsequent pharaohs. So there is this continuous line of we find scarabs for this pharaoh, then this pharaoh, then this pharaoh, and then that's the last one. We don't find any more after that. Well, when was Amenhotep III, when did he reign? Right around 1400 BC. And if the city was destroyed and nobody else was living there, it makes sense that there wouldn't be any other scarabs that would arrive there. So we can pretty well precisely pinpoint the date that Jericho was sacked and fell, and it just so happens to line up exactly with the dates and years and details that the Bible lays out. There are many, many more interesting details to the story. There's many other archaeological findings. If you all are interested, if you want to see the sources, see me afterward, or you can look up these books for yourself and get yourself a copy. But this is all extremely well documented. I hope this lesson has done something to build your faith, your confidence in the Bible, that when it says something, we might not be able to verify every single thing that it says, like, so-and-so said this. You might not be able to verify that. But the things that we can verify, if it says, this thing happened, and someone goes digging there, we find evidence that that thing happened over and over and over again. If you would like to study this topic more in depth, if you would like to study other topics about what you must do to be saved, or if you have questions about anything, we encourage you to please ask before you leave here this morning. We are eager and available to assist you in that if you should need. If you would, alternatively, if you would like the prayers of the church, or if you'd like to obey the gospel even this morning, we want to encourage you to let us know right now as we together stand and sing to encourage you.